Hey guys, it's DCHL Devin here, and today we are going to talk about the how to play and how to buy for the long-awaited Galadhrim. Now, guys, just so you know, this only covers the Galadhrim and Mirkwood faction that you can see in the Free People's book. We're going to go ahead and try to get out the rest of these factions before they get updated by Adam Trolk. So let's get to it, right into the review. We're going to talk about pros and cons, how to play these guys, and also get into how to buy them for less than $100. So let's talk about pros. And of course, being that this is Elves, we're going to talk about strong shooting. This is the only army with 2-up shots. If you get the Mirkwood Guard after buying Thranduil, then you can get 2-up shooters. Now, this might seem a bit expensive at 2 points per model. However, with the confinements of the bow limit, you might find yourself better off affording 2-up shooters rather than buying an extra bowman who might break the bow limit anyway. Also, not only do you have 2-up shots, you have strength 3 bows in this faction, so you can really hit hard and destroy a lot of defense 5 units that other armies can't hit. Also, this has some of the most useful heroes in the game. We're talking about Legolas, who is by far a must-pick in almost any Galadhrim force. He's able to pick off most Ringwraith targets, banners, and other assassination hits that you need to win the game. Also, he's not bad in combat. Then you have Thranduil, who causes an auto Nature's Wrath. This definitely cannot be ignored. It's a spell when you need it most, and it is really hard to resist, being that you need a 6. And then you even have Rummel, whom causes your opponent to re-roll 6s. Not to mention the plethora of other heroes. Haldur's not bad. Galadriel has the Mirror and also Blinding Light. And Celeborn is not too bad once you arm him up. You're talking about a bunch of heroes that really do well together and really are effective as a fighting force. So there are threats that your opponent really can't ignore. Another pro about this army is that they have a large amount of magic. And I'm not just talking about the Stormcallers, though that is something to be mentioned. Stormcallers are a hero model whom is able to cast Nature's Wrath. And if you spam these guys up, you can really make sure your opponent stays on the ground. But we're also talking about heroes whom also have Nature's Wrath and are of Dismay and Blinding Light, Immobilize, Command, since it's the good version models, and even some models that are in the Warrior section who can cast magic without the use of will. We're talking about the Mirkwood Sentinels. Now, they may not seem magical, however, in their fluff, it does talk about them using magic with their music in order to move enemy models, auto-pass courage tests, or cause terror themselves. So there is a lot of magic, and this allows the Lothlorien faction to get around most opponents where they need to. Also, lastly, we have to talk about the high fight value of the Galadhrim. Now, the Galadhrim have a fight 5, as is expected with most elves, but with the Galadhrim Guard, you're talking about they can even have warriors with fight 6. Now, remember that this fight value transfers all the way to the front of the line. So if you just put a Galadhrim Guard right in the back line, you can even outfight Fell Beasts, which is insane for the fact that Fell Beasts are becoming pretty common in meta. This is something that should be noted quite a bit. Fight 6 also outfights most heroes. If you think about it, not a single Rohan hero gets above Fight 5, and there are many other heroes who don't as well. Most heroes of men, in fact, with the exceptions of notable Boromir and Aragorn, can't get above Fight 5, which means that your average warrior elf is now conferring Fight 6 throughout the entire line. You are outfighting your opponent. This is an incredible thing. Even your basic warriors with Fight 5 have Elven Blades. So if you want to give them Elven Blades, you can now win the ties on a 3-up because of their Elven Blade rule. So not only do you have a high fight value, but even when your opponent manages to match it, you're still more likely to win. So let's get into the cons here, because, I mean, this army seems fantastic. What should we expect? Well, number one, the cavalry is weak and expensive. There's only one cav option in this army, and it really isn't all that great. They're a nice little flanking force, but overall your maneuverability and mobility is weak. And it's pretty pricey if you want it, especially since they can move through woodlands. That is a nifty little trick. However, it should be noted that these guys are not a go-to unit. Also, the defense of your faction is actually fairly weak. So you're talking about a defense of 3 or 4 average, which means that most general troops will wound you on 4s. So if you lose combat, you will die. This is actually an extremely big problem, something that Galadhrim have to fight with and struggle with game after game. Now, although magic is plentiful, it is also very situational. Note that Nature's Wrath really only just knocks down models. Sure, you have a lot of it, but that's really all you can do with it. You have to put your opponent in a situation in order to use it effectively. Also, certain other spells that you have, like Aria of Dismay, have no effect against, say, a bodyguarded army or an army with a high courage. These spells, like Call Winds as well, sure, you can use it and effectively knock down a troll, but if they don't have a troll or if they're spammy, then it really isn't helping you very much. So this is a slight problem with magic in this army, is that it's not kind of an obvious pick. Like, okay, if you have a lot of Immobilize or a lot of Compels, you can easily stop an opponent in their tracks with other heroes. This doesn't have really too many of those options. So next, you have strong shooting, but your dependence on it causes a serious problem. Remember that your defense is weak, so you really want to shoot your opponent as much as possible before combat hits. This means that you need to have deployment on your side. You really need it. Deployment is key with this army, and to avoid problems long enough. If you don't out-deploy your opponent, you will have issues. Also, terrain hurts you more than others. Now, I know we just said that these are elves, right? So terrain shouldn't be a problem. You can move through it. Well, the problem is your opponent can use terrain to their advantage in order to get over on you with shooting. So let's say you have all those strength 3 bows and 2-up accuracy. If your opponent smartly maneuvers around using the terrain, he might end up in your face with only 1 round of shooting that you've actually used. Then it's down to your fight 5 but really weak defense in order to win. And this can cause a serious problem. The thing is, Uruk-hai can go without shooting. If they have bows and they don't manage to use them, they're still effective in close combat. This is also the case for most other factions, but this is not the case for Galadhrim. Also, the symmetry between characters is extremely important. If separated, the army actually becomes weaker. Your army relies on threat ratios, so basically you need to apply as many threats as possible all at once. If your characters aren't applying threats, then your army is relatively easy to destroy with their low defense. And because of that low defense, isolated troops are also easy to kill. Now, remember that you have only 3 defense and 1 attack. So your fight value is great, but it only really helps if you fight stack. So basically you need a lot of dice. If you're rolling 1 dice and your opponent rolling 1 dice, your fight 5 isn't really going to come in handy too often. You need to fight in formations, you need to fight together. This is the only way this really works. That fight value needs to come in handy with lots and lots of dice. Also, the problem with this, low strength requires, once again, stacking dice to kill. Your models, even if they win a fight on a lucky roll by themselves, still only have strength 3 with no axes, assuming that you are playing models as WYSIWYG and don't allow them to have axes. Models out of the box do not come inherently with axes, and so hence strength 3 is your limit. With that, you need lots of dice in order to kill your opponent. Now, you do have elven blades, but you wouldn't really want to resort to one in a one-on-one combat. So once again, it goes without saying, isolated troops is a real problem in this army. And lastly, you have no monsters or hard-hitting units. So the thing is, even Gondor has a siege weapon if you want to bring it at that length. But this army has nothing above strength 3 unless you go into heroes, whom also cap at strength 4. So without any monsters or any aid of that, you're really not looking at any hurls or any disruptions other than your magic. So what should we do with these guys? I mean, how do we really play them? Well, for one, you probably want to bring some allies. Now, if you want to play dirty, you can play Alfred for Legolas and allow Legolas to shoot and gun down opponents with, reckless abandon, since Alfred will just give him all his might back. Rivendell Knights are an obvious choice over Galadhrim Knights, so highly recommended. Now, a lot of people also know dwarves are a great ally to this force because dwarves cause they mitigate all the problems that this army has. If you think about it, the dwarves have high strength, high defense, below mobility, and an average fight value, I suppose. 5-4 is decent, but with their defense 7 in the front line and an elven fight value in the back, they can confer that over, and you have basically fight 5, strength 4 with an axe dwarves, 7 defense, and an elves to back them up, and elven shooting to bring your opponent to you. This is actually a pretty powerful combination. A lot of people do use it. Next, you have Arnor for Rangers of the North on horses. Now, the reason we use these is because, as I mentioned, deployment is key. If you have a 31-point model, that is a single drop with a point of might, allowing you to scout out the opponent before you even need to deploy, this gives you a major advantage for your bows. You can deploy yourself in such a way that you don't have to worry if you forget deployment or don't really get a good deployment. Lastly, Eagles and Ents are, of course, an obvious ally. With the addition of monsters, you are now giving yourself that high strength and brutal power attacks you need to just really destroy your opponent. Basically, all in all, with allies, you just want to focus on either mobility, strong heroes, or brutal power attacks. Now, as far as how to play them, I'd always recommend dropping in a Galadhrim guard here or there just to add that fight 6 against fell beasts. But otherwise, go ahead and give yourself those 2-up shoot value Mirkwood guard, give yourself Thranduil and Legolas, and load up on some Galadhrim warriors. Now, if you want some cheaper ones and spammable ones, I'd actually recommend the Wood Elf warriors. Now, this is one that is probably far more common in order to hoard out with Galadhrim. Now, this might sound weird, but Galadhrim are actually quite capable of getting a solid amount of numbers using Wood Elves. As long as you can make sure you whittle your opponent down enough, and once combat hits, you always gain momentum by using Nature's Wrath, then you can ensure that your Defense 3 Wood Elves really won't get hurt too much. Now, before the accuracy penalties came into play, I would have recommended that you should use a lot of throwing weapons. Now, unfortunately, throwing weapons with the new accuracy penalty do not have as much punch as they used to, since a lot more of them will miss. However, with a 2-up shooting elf, you might find that not to be as much, but here's the thing, you're talking about a very expensive elf. That at the alone is 4 points just for the throwing weapon and then the shoe-up accuracy, and then you have the pose, which will cost you another 2 points. So that's 6 points just to have some gimmick. I'd recommend leaving the throwing weapons out of this. So next, that is pretty much how you play these guys as far as deploying them, as far as what army to pick. As far as actually maneuvering on the field, of course, you probably want to have your back to terrain or be in terrain if you see flyers on the field. Remember, terrain prevents your opponent from flying right into you. And of course, have the shooters in the back line, have the elves with elven blades in the front line. Always remember to feint, because remember, your fight value would drop in the front line, but then be raised right back up in the back. And then, of course, with your heroes, that is really where you want to cause most of the disruption. Use Legolas to kill the Shadow Lord or any other Ringwraith that's causing you problems. If there is no Ringwraith in play, use him to bring down banners if you can. You can call heroic accuracies also to assassinate targets. Let's say you're playing against dwarves. Definitely call a heroic accuracy and assassinate dwarves unless the dwarven hero is right in the front. Now, this might sound a little weird because dwarven heroes are really high defense, but remember, all of them are high defense. You're not killing much anyway, so if you're going to hurt something, it might as well be those really hard to defeat heroes. So this is something that I would recommend on there, and I have seen it employed quite a bit in tournament play. If you happen to have any cav, then of course use them on the flanks. I would not use them as an absolute hitting force. They are not a striking force. They are a mobility force, a harasser. They are not meant to charge headlong in without a whole bunch of support along with them. Now, the use of banners is also something to be noted as the last thing with Galadhrim. The fact that you need to stack dice to win fights means that banners mean more for you than it does for your opponents. So a banner is actually not a bad idea unless you just feel that having more elves would be more beneficial for you. And in some cases it is. This is going to be really, really dependent on your list. But as a basic list, I would take Thranduil, Legolas, full warbands of elves, and if you have to have more than that, then Galadriel is a great start to that. I mean, this is assuming no allies in your list. You can do Sentinels with Galadhrim Guard. If you want to go crazy with it, then you can maybe do Sentinels in the front rank, whom can cause terror, can pass terror tests, and move models, and then throw 2 Galadhrim Guard in the back rank. That's 4 attacks plus a banner. You might have a full warband of this, and that's 5 dice that you're rolling in the fight phase. Well, really, 4 dice with a reroll. So you can ensure you'll win combats. I mean, just gimmicks. You can play around with this quite a bit, but overall you'll see most common forces just sticking with your regular Wood Elves. Now, guys, we're going to go ahead into our how to buy part of this video. Now, this is going to be rather short only because as of the time of this recording, there really isn't much on the Games Workshop website. The Galadhrim list has been stripped down to pretty much only about 11 options, and unfortunately Legolas is not one of them. If you want Legolas, you're going to have to go into the Fellowship section where you have to buy pretty much a $36 box of the 3 hunters in order to really get him, or buy the entire Fellowship. So this makes a very expensive option, and as I said before, Legolas is a must pick. So the first thing we're going to want to know is, alright, how do we get Legolas in your army? Now, here's how I'd recommend it. If you're, well, before I get into it, I know a lot of people in the comments section are going to say, well, what about eBay? What about the Lord of the Rings trade group? Guys, I'm not going to cover those here because the fact that those groups have ever fluctuating prices based on availability and based on each person, which means that I have no idea how much it's going to cost you. But yes, of course, the first recommendation is always to go to eBay, is always to go to a friend or someone online. This will probably be a much cheaper method than getting it directly from the Games Workshop site. However, for you new guys who really don't want to go through the hassle of trying to find those prices on eBay or try to negotiate for it, I'm just going to give you the best way that you can go on the Games Workshop website and get this army started up for under $100. Now remember, this also is excluding tournament players. If you're looking to play this army in a tournament, then you're probably going to have to follow WYSIWYG, which means that you really have no choice but to get the model that you're looking for. But this is assuming that you just want to get into the game. So first, if we're just trying to get into the game, the one I want to point out is the Mirkwood Sentinels. If you look, this is only $15 for a guy with a bow, a guy with a horn, and a guy with a flute. Now, what I'd recommend with this is that you use the guy with the horn as a Stormcaller. The Stormcaller is a hero option, and this actually has such a dramatic pose and such a good sculpt that it really actually doesn't look too bad for a Stormcaller unit. Also, you have the one with the bow. This makes a fantastic Legolas proxy if you want to use it. Granted, it doesn't look like Legolas, but had Legolas not been in a movie with Orlando Bloom, then this would have looked like a fine Legolas. So that is another option for you. The flute can either be a Sentinel, of course, or you can just make it a captain model. I mean, either way is up to you. I mean, hell, I'd even authorize it to be like a banner if you really wanted it to be. Next is pretty easy. The Wood Elf Warriors are only $24 a box. They are a must pick. If you want, you can get Galadhrim Warriors instead. They are the same price for the same amount of models, and that'll give you the 2 warbands that you need to start off. So, sorry about that ding, guys. That's actually my phone going off. So basically, the next thing you have is the Galadhrim Guard. If you want them, I'd recommend sticking with Galadhrim Warriors, and you'll notice those spearmen, you don't have to attach the shields to them. This allows you to have a nice little cheap Galadhrim Guard. So remember, I only said you needed about 2 or 3 or 4 of them in order to make your list effective against fell beasts. So there you go. This box comes with 4. That's really all you need. Now, of course, some of the other heroes of this faction are relatively cheap. If you go the route I told you with Sentinels and the 2 Wood Elf Warrior sets, then you'll notice that you actually have a lot of money left over. You really haven't hit too much. So from there, you can just get either another box set and use that flute carrier, as I told you, as a captain model, and therefore you have 3 total warbands, or you can paint up one of the Galadhrim Warriors to look different, or you can slightly bump above $100 and just go ahead and get the Galadhrim Commanders pack. I think that your best bet is to have a full third warband. So I would get the Galadhrim Warriors pack, another full warband, and with that you'll have a full 3 warbands plus your Wood Elf Sentinels that are acting as your Stormcaller, Legolas, and a captain model that you need to field all 3 of them. They look different enough, it shouldn't confuse your opponent at all. So this is my section on how to buy. You guys let me know if you think there's another easier way to buy anything in the comment section below, or a better way to play things as far as just a beginner. Remember guys, this is just an overall tactics video. If you're a veteran of the channel, then you probably don't need to go into the most basics of what this discusses. But for a beginner player, this is a great guide just to get started and play the game.